Warning: the following video contains explicit language, which may be offensive to some viewers or inappropriate for children. The content within this video is intended for mature audiences only.
Science fiction, the great teacher, the great inspiration. It helps us see the endless possibilities of life. So let's be inspired together.
Come with me if you want to live.
We are all explorers, driven to know what's over the horizon, what's beyond our own shores.
We are not sending out interceptors. We have taken them completely by surprise.
Hello everybody, welcome to another episode of Trekker Critique. I'm Commodore Jeff. It's been a while since I've done one of these, but I think, it's sort of a much needed break from the traditional political stuff that I usually talk about here online. As you might imagine, I'm kind of burnt out from the whole election fiasco that's been going on for well, actually it's been going on for years, because ever since Biden became president, Trump's been non-stop campaigning, right? So anyway, nice pretty much good day here in Maine today. Cooler but not cold, and partly sunny, so hey, nice day. So in this video, I wanted to touch on something here that I notice a lot online. People, especially Trek fans, because this topic's about Star Trek. Usually it's about science fiction in general, but I seem to always gravitate towards Star Trek. But with this here, I wanted to talk about starship designs, okay, and why they seemingly have a pattern, and I wanted to break that down into something that's falls in line more with coherent, how can I say it, engineering practices that you can see in today's world. Okay, like let's say a jet from the 1950s is not going to look like a jet today, because the things that a jet could do back then is all incorporated into today's jets, plus new stuff. All right, so the design of the jet, because it can go faster, it can do more things, it carries different weapons, it's completely redesigned, so it doesn't look something like from the 50s. Same thing with an automobile. You get a Studebaker versus I don't know, pick your car for today. They don't look alike, right? They're even made out of different materials, where older car back then, it was solid. Okay, I mean, them friggin' cars back then, if you hit a telephone pole, the car wouldn't wrap around it like they would today. You would actually destroy the telephone pole and keep on going. But not today. Today, the vehicles are made with lighter materials to allow for faster speeds, and they're more streamlined for aerodynamic performance to make it easier to handle on the road. The tires are even different. The engines themselves are made differently. So yeah, you go back 60 years and you see a car from back then. The design philosophy back then is not the same today. But, we still have to say we built on what they did do back then and made it better, okay? In some degree. When it comes to the Star Trek ships on TV, they follow that same kind of philosophy, okay? And up to a point, it was pretty reliable. It was, you could understand it. Like, let's see, okay. I mean, I realize this series didn't come till much later, but they did try and make it look like it was something that came before Captain Kirk's starship. So here, this is Enterprise NX-01. Okay, see it? It's, you know, it's flat, and it's, you know, got a magnet here on the bottom because it's a refrigerator ornament. Okay, and, you know, it's, you know, it looks like it's really kind of detailed, you know, like you could tell it wasn't like really a design that, that had everything ironed out. I mean, it was still, you could see the ideas were still in conceptual stage on this ship. But, you know, they took it out into deep space. They could travel to warp 5, okay, and they went as far as they could go with it, you know. And so, I mean, you look at the nacelles here, okay, because you'll see a little bit of that in this next one, which is the more familiar one from the 60s here, the Captain Kirk's Starship Enterprise. Now, you can see the nacelles here. And this ship can go warp 8, okay, where the other one went warp 5. But there's like 100 years between this one and this one, okay? Now, forgetting that the hook is just to hang it up on the ceiling there, but all right. So you have these nacelles, which kind of, in a way, mirror a little bit of these nacelles, okay? But they're larger, you know, they got what I call less surface detail on it because the engineers, you know, the engineers have learned to streamline the hull much better, okay? And, you know, the saucer is bigger, it holds more people, and, you know, it's, it can go faster and further into space, okay? And so, for, I don't know, I guess you could say for 50 years, sorry, the dust, this is pretty much how, you know, these ships kind of looked. Now, you know, of course, there's some pictures of the TOS Enterprise people have put up there that show the Enterprise a little bit updated as time went on, okay? I'm going to say that in the 5-year mission that we're all familiar with, in that 5-year mission, these starships were already considered outdated, okay? And they were being upgraded little by little, okay? And by the time we go from the end of TOS to the movies, which was Star Trek the Motion Picture, we see that they completely remodeled this ship to look like this, okay? A lot of changes, okay? The look of it is much different. The nacelles are different. The saucer is different. All the advances in that 5 years that Kirk was out there in space exploring finally got all installed into the ship when they brought it back, and they upgraded it this way. Now, some people say that in order to make the ship go from this to this, they must have had to tear this one all to hell, basically, and rebuild a whole brand new Enterprise. Well, maybe that's kind of what you would think, okay? Of course, you can't, you know, if you remodel your house, let's say, would you tear the whole thing down, or would you just tear down and leave the frame of what was there? You know what I'm saying? I mean, how much would you, you know, change it? I mean, this does kind of look like a complete reworking of the ship itself. You know, that perhaps they at some degree actually did, you know, I mean, I know these nacelles, they simply just took the old ones off and replaced them with these, so they probably didn't have to work these things in, they were already made. The pylons obviously are brand new. No, those were probably something that, you know, they took the old ones off and just put these new ones on. The secondary hull, which would be this part here, it's thicker, you know, longer, has more room for the shuttle bay. I could see that they probably might have taken the older one and maybe just ripped it up a little bit and then just, you know, made the frame larger and then built onto that, you know. same thing with this pylon here, and the torpedo bay this is new, that wasn't there before. Okay, you see what I'm saying? But they basically, you know, in that 5 years when they was flying around with this one, and Starfleet was making all those new landmark achievements and new technologies, when they came home and they put the ship in dry dock and they started working on it, this was the end result of all those new advancements, and this is what they come out with. So when they made this one, the ship could go a little faster, take people out further, had more weapons, okay, more defenses. And sometimes, you know, when it comes to the weapons and things like that, that would dictate the times in which they were living in. And of course, you all know about the Klingons and the Romulans and all that stuff, okay? So it was said that the Klingons were getting more violent and more warmongering, so these ships weren't cutting it anymore, and they needed to update them so that way they could defend themselves better out in deep space. Makes sense, right? I mean, we do that today with stealth technology and new battleships and stuff with technology to protect themselves better from new weaponry. Okay, makes sense. Okay. And then, you know, I guess you could say about 15 years later, we have, you know, this design, and then Starfleet creates a prototype of this design, all right, that's 15 years later, where they've taken everything that they've advanced from the motion picture Enterprise. All that 15 years of all those advancements have been incorporated into this design. Now, why did they drop that design? Why did they let this one go? Probably because the advancements were probably more than this ship was able to have. Now, if you could look, the nacelles are different. Okay, actually, the nacelles here are an upgrade from these ones. Okay, these nacelles are actually, there's this same warp drive system, but it can go faster and further in deep space than these ones here. It's still the same concept of warp drive, but because of the refit of the technology of the system, now we have these. Okay. And of course it has new impulse engines, and it's bigger too. It's a larger ship, carries about 600 to 800 people, and you can see, you know, actually on this ship here, this secondary hull really only has, you know, two functions here of the engineering and shuttle bay, which is a huge compartment back here, you know, plus it has more defenses where it has aft torpedo launchers and phasers, okay, and it has a lot more phaser banks along the main hull here, the saucer section, for more coverage, you know, more firing arcs, which is important, and you got torpedoes up here and torpedo launchers there. So you have a lot of improvements, and you know, this design, you know, was something obviously they needed to make, because at the time the thing with the situation with the Klingons was becoming was becoming more violent, okay? And so they needed to make something that could, you know, withstand it. At the time, this was considered more of a battleship than a space exploration cruiser, although all these starships, whether they're battleships or whatever you want to call them, they're all designed to have some degree of exploration capabilities. But at the time when this first came out, it was considered to be a battleship because of all the weaponry. Now, that doesn't mean that they weren't still using, you know, these ones, okay? But they were starting to get phased out, because even by the, you know, by, well, how can I say it? At the end of the second 5-year mission that Kirk had with this ship, these ships were already starting to get a little dated for its time. The design itself was getting dated. There was only so much more they could do with it to keep it up to date with everything else in the fleet. All right. So, you know, this is how, that's kind of the lineage of engineering design that goes, and that takes us right up to the end of the 23rd century, okay, with the Excelsior design, okay, which eventually they made many more of these kind of ships, and so the next time we see Star Trek again, which is, you know, Star Trek The Next Generation, okay, we see how far they have advanced in that 80-year period, okay? And by seeing the Enterprise D, which was, you know, very advanced in its look, you could see that there's a whole lot of different concepts at play there on that ship, and that's just 80 years. And believe it or not, they're still using Excelsior ships in that time period, because because when we leave the 23rd century, the Excelsior class was relatively new, okay, and they were still making a lot of them. Now, one could argue that, you know, in that 80-year period between TOS and Next Generation, you know, there was sort of what they would call a golden era, where, I mean, the only war they really had was with the Cardassians, but that sort of ended in a stalemate, like what happened in North and South Korea, sort of ended that way. And the Klingons, you know, peace negotiations and stuff with them were doing wonders to keep calm in the galaxy, and the Romulans sort of went into seclusion for a good portion of that time. You know, we don't see their faces again for, you know, almost 60 years later, after, you know, so the Romulans are gone. So that, you know, there's good times, you know, in Starfleet, and there wasn't much need, I think, to build, you know, newer and more advanced ships. The Galaxy class starship, you know, essentially was designed solely for exploration. That was all it was for. I mean, they didn't design it with any thing in mind, like, well, we got to fight a war or something. Although, you know, it had plenty of weaponry and stuff like that, but it was basically a peacetime starship, okay. So we have a lot of differences in the appearance of the Galaxy class as opposed to the other ones that I show you here. So when we see The Next Generation, we're watching the show, okay? There was this episode that came out, which is the whole point of why I'm doing this fucking video here, okay? There was an episode called The Best of Both Worlds. It's a two-part episode where we meet the Borg, or where it's, well, we don't meet them, but the Borg threat is there. And it's a threat that the Federation had never faced before. But because, you know, they've dealt with difficult things before, I guess Starfleet felt they could handle it. So in that episode, the Borg are flying to Earth to attack it and enslave the human race, okay? During the course of the fight, they run across the Federation, the Starfleet fleet of ships, you know, a whole bunch of them, okay. In that episode, though, we don't actually see the fight itself, okay. We don't see excerpts of that till like in Deep Space Nine, okay, at the pilot episode. But we don't really actually see the fight. But what we do see is the Enterprise D arriving to what's left of that fleet at Wolf 359, completely ruined, okay. Now, in the scene where they were showing the ships that were wrecked, you see a shot of, like this, of what looked like the bottom of one of the Connies from the motion picture, okay, just kind of sitting there hanging in space, all right? Now, everybody has taken that to mean that, oh, they're still making these ships, okay? No, not necessarily. What that probably means is that they didn't have enough time to assemble all the best ships they had. And they knew they needed a lot of ships. If they were going to fight the Borg, they needed everything they could get their hands on. I call this the Godzilla effect. Okay, if you've watched any Godzilla movies, okay, you're going to see that every time Godzilla appears, which is their biggest threat to Tokyo, they not only bring out new weapons, but they bring out everything else that they have that can fire and shoot at them. Okay, old stuff, new stuff, everything. They bring the whole kit and caboodle out. Okay, that's what they did here at Wolf 359. Ships that were marginally functional, okay, mothballed even, anything that could still fly and fire anything, any weapons or something, they quickly rushed into action. They put crews in them and they sent them out. Okay, they even had some of these older ships like this here out there, which is right around the time of the Star Trek the Motion Picture era or something like that. Okay, these aren't new designs either. Okay, but you do see a lot of these pop up every now and then on TNG and Deep Space Nine and all that. Okay, these I think people can assume they're still building because they keep showing up all the time. Of that I don't understand, because from the very first I thought that was a little bit weird that they would be using a 80-year-old design ship to fight in some battles where the enemy has way more superiority over these things than the other ships do. These would just be cannon fodder. Okay, they don't travel as fast, so that means the rest of the fleet's got to go slow in order for these ships to keep up with them. Okay, their firepower is limited at best. They don't have quantum torpedoes, but they have regular photon torpedoes, and you know, whatever. Okay, again, but we still see those ships there. But because we see so many of those there, people have made the connection that if we're seeing all these Miranda class ships, and that's what this is, a Miranda class ship, if we're seeing all these Miranda class ships still being used in the 24th century, then because we saw the bottom half of this starship here floating in deep space, they must be still making these. And I'm saying, no, it doesn't make any logical sense. If these ships are still being made and they still think that they are up to par with 24th century needs, then why would they even make a Galaxy class starship? Why would they even make an Ambassador class starship that was, you know, before the Enterprise D, the Enterprise C? Why would they bother, you know, making anything other than these in the 24th century? Okay, why even bother making all these upgrades for all this time before that and then just stop doing it for 80 years? Okay, I just don't understand why people think that they would still be making those ships. There's only so much you can do to upgrade this thing for the needs, because look, the further you explore into space, that means the further more you got to push outward to keep finding new areas, new territories, new worlds, right? This isn't going to cut it at some point. It's only going to get, you're going to have to look at this as a multi-generational ship at some point, unless you can make it go faster. And if you're going to make it go faster, then you have to design the ship, the nacelles are going to have to be changed. The body of the vessel, you're going to have to make it larger to support more supplies, more crew. You know what I'm saying? You're going out into deeper space, so the ship itself has to be, you know, or the design has to be upgraded. And sometimes the upgrade is so significant, you go from that to this. Okay? And that's just the Constellation class. So that's, you know, basically what I'm saying is that in that 80-year period from Star Trek 6, okay, to Star Trek The Next Generation, okay, you got 80 fucking years. Now, think about that for a minute. In just 40 years, they upgraded, you know, this ship into looking like the movie era in just 40 years. Okay? Now, you take another 80 years later, you know, eventually, you know, that Constellation, Connie, or that like people like to call it, is just going to be an outdated design. Okay? You're not going to see any more of those things around. It's going to be, you know, the technology is going to be so advanced that that design would be too old to house the technology that they would need for it. Okay, it just can't be done. It just can't be done. So they'd have to retire those designs, just like we retire old aircraft, like, hey, the Concorde. We don't use that anymore, right? 'Cause we just don't need it. But, you know, we still make jets, and, you know, we retire older jets in the military. I mean, older jets we don't use because, you know, they're not as efficient as the newer ones, and we just don't see them in the air anymore. The same thing can be applied here. You know, time and time as it goes on, things change, and the looks of things eventually change. I mean, you can get away with upgrading, you know, something like this for decades, and it would still look the same on the outside. But eventually, you're going to reach a point of, you know, you've reached the top, you've reached the cap here of what this little thing, the ship can do. And if you want it to do more, you're going to have to replace parts. You're going to have to take and redesign this. You're going to have to enlarge that. And before you know it, you're looking at a whole different vessel. Okay, it's not going to look the same anymore. And so, like I said, in Star Trek The Next Generation, they had that episode where they showed that piece of the motion picture Enterprise. Okay, it was actually the model I think that they used. Okay, because back then we didn't have CGI to make these spaceships, so they used actual models that they were using in the movies to just fill in the gaps. Okay, or they kit bash something. I think they made some ships that were in there that were just models from the store, toy store, where we get the models, and they just kit bash something together just to make it look different. Okay, but that's how we had to do it. So it was budgetary reasons why they couldn't be more creative with that. Otherwise, they probably wouldn't have bothered to stick that in there in the first place, right? But because they did, and everyone, and this drives me crazy, but, you know, when it comes to fandom, if it wasn't seen on TV or in the movies, it's not canon, okay? And so when they saw that in their mind canonized the idea that they're still building Constellation or Constitution class starships in the 24th century. And like I said, I disagree with that because I don't think it makes much sense, engineering speaking, or when you're talking about upgrading technology, it makes no sense. Okay, those ships are 80 years old. The design is 80 years old. Could you put the same kind of technology inside of a Studebaker? You know, could you make that thing do all the stuff that a modern car? Of course not. You'd have to redesign so much of it. Okay, and it would you couldn't get the same gas mileage that you can out of a modern car. I mean, it's too heavy for the road. It's just, you know, it's not safe. It just wouldn't meet the needs. Okay, and so that's why I say it's one of those things where, you know, because of budgetary reasons, Star Trek kind of dropped the ball when it comes to showing things like that, because like I said, they were still using these models from the movies that they were using, and they would just put those in the TV show episodes like that. I don't like to canonize that that's the way. I can certainly accept seeing Excelsior class ships in there at that time, but I think by then they would be phasing them out. Okay, they wouldn't still be using them so much. They would probably use them less, maybe more for just transporting dignitaries from one place to another, or keeping them close to home for defense, you know. But even those ships would not be adequate enough to do the same duties that, you know, they're expecting like a Galaxy class starship to do. Okay, so by then you saw that, you know, from being top of the line in the 23rd century, it's now basically, you know, an old bucket. It's an old design, and it really shouldn't still be around, just like these ships shouldn't have still been seen in the later episodes of Star Trek, because again, they would be so overmatched by whatever the hell what's out there, that they just could not stand up against much of anything. It's basically a flying coffin at that point, you know. So I go now to you know, let me just say this here. We go into like the new stuff, okay, like Discovery and things like that, which I'm not a big fan of. Okay, I think I quit really enjoying Star Trek after you know, the Kelvin movies, you know, the Kelvin era, you know, the stuff that J.J. Abrams was making. I think pretty much after that, I kind of just, you know, took Star Trek with a grain of salt after that, because it really it seemed like they were trying to detach itself from its own goddamn birth, you know, Star Trek, and that never works. Okay, they tried doing that with other things when they reboot things, and it just doesn't. It never seems to work. They've been trying to reboot Star Trek for a good 15, 20 years now. Okay, and it's been very controversial. It's you know, it's been messy, as a friend of mine put it. It really requires, you know, people not to have seen anything for the last 40 years that was made Star Trek in order to start watching this, you know, because if you've come into this thing for as many years as I have and you're watching this, you're not going to see the connection. Okay, there really is no linear connection to this. It's all different. Okay, but I'm just gonna venture here into talking about Discovery, because the Star Trek Discovery, you know, supposedly takes place before Kirk and Spock and the 5-year mission. Okay, now when we see the Discovery, it doesn't look like anything you would have seen in TOS. Okay, now the reason being is that that's a CGI model. Okay, there was no physical model made of the Discovery like they used to do. Okay, it's completely computer generated. And because it was computer generated, they wanted to actually show it off big time by showing, this is what we can do now. Okay, fine. But, you know, let's keep it in perspective here. You're talking about a period in Star Trek history that's already been established. Okay, has been watched, rewatched, and rewatched for decades, and people to this day still watch it. We when we see it, when we hear it, we recognize where we are. That's how familiar it is. Discovery, it takes all that away. There's nothing familiar with Discovery that would give you the indication that it's set in that time period. Nothing. I mean, they could have afforded a little bit of some familiarity there. Okay, but it's like they redesigned the wheel. You know, they redesigned the whole concept of the 23rd century in Star Trek Discovery, which was a huge slap in the fans' face, because look, they wanted to feel like we recognize some of this stuff. Okay, I mean, yeah, they could have made some changes, like the engine room could be a little different, the bridge could have been a little different. But the corridors, why would they have to be so different? You know, a corridor is a corridor, right? I mean, they could have had some familiar looking doors and doodads in the hallway and stuff that looked like they got it from TOS, right? To try to harken back a little bit, to show people that, yeah, we have some new stuff, but we're still using some of these things too, because this is the 23rd century, right? They could have done that. The uniforms, well, they could have been a little okay different. I mean, they did have some variations in TOS on uniforms. I mean, they changed a little bit, but you know, they didn't really need to go the whole route of changing and making it a completely different era-looking thing. All right, and I think from the beginning, it really just did not feel like it was Star Trek the way they remembered it. Okay. And that's just, I'm just talking about, you know, the surface detail of it. I'm not going to get into the stories and the characters and all that shit here with this video. I'm just talking about aesthetically speaking. Okay. So it doesn't fit with the lineage of the times. And that's been important with Star Trek for all these years, you know, from TOS all the way up to TNG. Okay, is this sense of the series growing up, you know, getting brought, you know, expanding itself, and you know, even in some episodes that came out later, much later, you know, sometimes they would do a flashback episode or something where we go back to this period in time travel or something, and they deliberately show us what, you know, the way things looked, so you know you're there, right? You know, so it was reestablished in newer episodes of the TOS era, but Discovery didn't want to do that. It didn't want to do that, and it's just, that's what made it hard for older fans to accept it. It's like, okay, well, how do you explain this? How do you explain that? And they never would explain. Okay, all the other ships that they showed in Discovery all looked different. Didn't look like it belonged in that era. Some even argue they look like they belong in the 24th century. Okay, those designs, you know, they never explained. So people are, you know, try so hard to wrap their heads around it, to try to explain it, to fit it into canon, to beat the living shit out of it so it will fit into canon, but they can't. It just can't, you know, because to do that, you'd have to unravel so much around Star Trek in order to allow that to be absorbed into that era. Okay, you'd have to do that. You just can't do it. It'd be like trying to take a stealth fighter, sending it back in time to the 1940s, and saying, okay, that was always there. Okay, it's like it doesn't belong there because it looks out of place. Okay, this cannot be 1940s airplanes. Okay, you know, it's like that. It just doesn't work. So they took all the stuff that they've been doing, you know, like in the movies, Next Generation, all that, and they tried to shoehorn that in to a later series that takes place in the early 23rd century. Okay, no, can't do it that way. That's really anti-lineage, anti-Star Trek in a lot of ways, but it doesn't work. It doesn't make sense. Okay, and even though it's science fiction, I understand that it's a TV show, it's a movie or whatever. Okay, it's not real. People have a respect for the franchise. They respect what it is, just like there's people who respect Star Wars and like to keep that in sort of a continuum. All right, Doctor Who, I mean, it's a different science fiction, but there's still a certain thing people expect from it because it maintains the continuum that it exists in. We like the same thing for Star Trek. We want it to maintain its integrity, especially after all these years. Okay, I think we owe it to the creator and the people who've worked their asses off in the early years of Star Trek to keep it in mind that these people worked hard to make it this way. Let's keep it that way. If you want to make something that's different, okay, or something that doesn't have to follow the same guidelines that Star Trek has to follow, then go make your own science fiction franchise. Go do that. Okay, it's been done. I mean, they made Babylon 5. That was something that was outside of Star Trek, right? People love that, right? I mean, what's the problem with people trying to create their own new thing? Trek fans are always interested in seeing some new ideas out there. You know, Lost in Space. I know it's an older TV show, but it had its thing. It was popular, you know, at the time. You know, they didn't stray outside of way the shows were and all that. But why does Paramount feel like they got to do that with Star Trek? Why are they trying to upset what's been done to try, you know, and say that everything that was done before was crap and we're going to make it better? It wasn't crap. If it was crap, it never would have lasted. They wouldn't have done 6 movies or 8, 10 movies, okay? They wouldn't have done any of those movies. They wouldn't have done 7 TV series, okay? If all that shit was crap, then why was it on for so long? Okay, it's crap only because you didn't like the way they were doing it, okay? Because you had ideas you wanted to do at Star Trek, but people said no, because that's not Star Trek. That's why you people say it was crap. It's like, well, if you can't do it there, do it somewhere else. Harlan Ellison. I don't know how many of you people know him, but Harlan Ellison is a perfect example of how people wanted to turn Star Trek into something different, but were slapped down and said no, because that's outside the guidelines of what this series is about. He couldn't accept that, and for decades, this freaking guy would just bitch and bitch and bitch about the one episode that was actually a very good episode, City on the Edge of Forever, but what he wrote originally doesn't really resemble what eventually was put on the air. And he didn't understand at the time that, you know, there's certain things you can't put on the air back then that's, you know, outside of the family-oriented TV show. We had to trim it. We had to cut the language back. We had to we had to change it around. But essentially, the basics of what he wrote was still there, and he did get credit for it. But the whole story is completely different from the one he originally wrote, which you can buy in a bookstore. The actual story that he had written, the screenplay of it, and you'll see there's a lot of stuff in there that wouldn't have passed back then. You could air it today probably with the way Star Trek is now, but back then you couldn't. Okay, and he didn't understand that, because I think, you know, he was just like young in his career, and getting the opportunity to see something he wrote on TV was a big thing. It was like, wow, my name's going to get out there. And he didn't understand, you know, that Hollywood, the TV set is a different medium than, let's say, the books that people write is a different medium. Okay, the two things you can't compare, because, you know, with a TV, you've got restrictions, you got advertisements, you got to stay within a time frame. There's got to be a certain language, you know, you can't swear. In a book, you can cut through all that and do what you want. Okay, so he learned the hard way about how TV is actually done. Okay, now let's go ahead. I mean, we think, I think, I'm not going to say we, but I think that, you know, a lot of people today resented the fact that, you know, folks like, you know, Rick Berman and others who kind of took the reins after Roddenberry passed away, kind of kept things still under some sort of control that they didn't like. Granted, some of the things Rick Berman wouldn't allow were coming from an old-fashioned view of things, okay? But, you know, he just wouldn't put it out there for whatever reason. And I'm sure he had his fights with them. Roddenberry certainly did. I mean, when he was getting sick towards I don't know, was it 1991 or something? I mean, when he was really getting sick, he had to have a lawyer actually watching what was being done there, because he couldn't do it himself anymore. But there was always a level of tension between Roddenberry and the executives at Paramount, because they wanted to see Star Trek be more action-oriented, a lot like it is today. They wanted to see it like that today. But Roddenberry wouldn't allow it, because it was his vision. It was his TV show, okay? He created it, and this is the way he wanted it presented. There was nothing wrong with it, okay? You know, and even in some of the movies, he didn't really like, you know, the way Star Trek 2 was, or you know, or some, you know, he didn't like Star Trek 5, okay? He wasn't really involved with that much. So a lot of times, you know, Hollywood would get its way, and it didn't always work. Okay, I mean, arguably, people would say Star Trek II was the most popular of the films, but it was probably the least Gene Roddenberry-esque of the movies. Okay, even though a lot of people say it resembled TOS. Well, yeah, maybe on the surface it did, but the story and all that it was talking about didn't really have much to do with the future vision that Roddenberry had for Star Trek. It just wasn't that. Okay, it was more on display in the first film, which he had more hands-on with when it was in its production. But the other movies, he didn't really have much to do with it. Okay, so when he did Star Trek The Next Generation, he really wanted to have his influence in that series. Okay, and of course, he passed away during, I think, the second season, and that's why Rick Berman took over. But Rick Berman, I guess he wanted to kind of honor Roddenberry's wishes, at least on that series. Okay, he didn't do so well. I mean, he didn't follow those strict guidelines, I guess, with Voyager, when he got involved with Voyager and then Enterprise. But he tried to follow Roddenberry's view on that with TNG, just out of respect, I guess. But like I said, there is a need to maintain the integrity of the series, which I've been talking about, you know, with these spaceships and stuff that they design. There's a certain continuity that has to be displayed there, just like you could see that the phasers, the hand phasers, look different as time goes on. You could still see how they evolved into what they become. You didn't see them coming up with something completely off the wall, like, you know, phasers that come out of the lens of a, you know, or something. Okay, they always tried to make something that would harken back to an earlier You know what I'm saying? So when it comes to these spaceships and things like that, they are characters in themselves on these shows, okay? And as characters, they display the periods in which they represent, okay? And when you got a Star Trek show, when you have this show, Star Trek, that has all these decades behind it, the importance of seeing these ships evolve as we move forward in its timeline it becomes important, because it gives us a sense of we're seeing where we're going here. We're seeing that we are moving forward and not staying stagnant, okay? And that's why I say, when you look at, when you take the idea that, oh, because we saw this, this starship, the piece of it in TNG, oh, it means we're still building them. No, it can't be. It wouldn't make sense. It's totally anti everything that we know about Star Trek. The evolution of these starships is important. 80 years later, they wouldn't still be using these, as much as they used to 80 years earlier, okay? They would probably have some stored somewhere as a museum piece or something like that. But they would only bring it out if the situation was so dire that they had to bring it out, then they would, okay? And that would be the only reason why you'd see, ships like this around still, or like that, basically. And, even in the 24th or 25th century, the Fleet Museum still has one of these sitting in there. But that doesn't mean they're making them still, or they're still using them, okay? It's just sitting there, all right? It's just for people to come and see how ships have evolved over time. And that's the important thing about that, is that, when we talk about the human experience with Star Trek, okay, what we create with our hands and our minds is just as much a part of that human experience as, how people behave, okay? And so part of what makes us human is that we're always updating things as we go. We're always trying to find better ways to do things. What's acceptable today, well, 5 years later, we come up with something better. I mean, we're doing that today, right? How many different versions of iPhones have come out? How many Windows versions do we have? We're always updating, always doing better, trying to reinvent things all the time, okay? So we have to show that too when it comes to Star Trek, because human beings do that. We are always updating stuff, making things better. Even the uniforms, okay? People laugh about that, uniforms, okay? Even the uniforms have changed so many times over the years of Star Trek, okay? That too is an indication of times changing, things, people trying to update. Sometimes the updates last, sometimes they don't, it's what we do, I mean, right in my time, from the Air Force, the uniforms that I wore when I was in the Air Force, they don't make them that way now. It's all different. Okay, so to this day, uniforms have changed a lot over the decades of the existence of our military, and it's the same with militaries around the world. So that's humanity, and so these ships represent humanity just as much as the time period and stuff like that. It gives us a sense of where we are when we watch these shows. And that's why, it was unfortunate that Discovery couldn't understand that, the people at Discovery. They wanted to, for the sake of showing off what they could do, they wanted to just rewrite the TOS era, the 23rd century, with something that didn't belong there. And instead of doing that, what they should have done, basically, was to create a series that takes place after, way after, like after the Next Generation or something like that. They really could have showed off then. I mean, it would have fit right in nicely, if I do say. It would have fit in nicely with evolutionary ideas, okay? If they'd have set the time period in the 25th century, then it would have been explained, very explainable. We could say, this is the Discovery era, okay? This is the 25th century, Okay, and it fits because they're establishing a new time period with some new looks, some new things. Okay, that separates it from all the other eras that came before it. They show the lineage of it, everything evolving further into the future. Okay, you know, that's basically what this video here is supposed to be about. Is my opinion. Okay, I'm not trying to make this as fact because nothing about Star Trek is really fact. Okay, and a lot of it it contradicts itself. But I'm just talking about this because I think a lot of Star Trek fans out there have this misconception, I think, that they keep perpetuating, that, you know, we can take something from 80 years ago and modernize it enough to make it relevant today. Well, it doesn't work that way. It doesn't. I mean, because humans, we constantly upgrade things to the point where what was old really can't be used anymore, okay, unless you want to relegate it back to just something minor, okay. But most of the time, people just won't look back when it comes to evolution. We might look back in nostalgia over these things, but, you know, nostalgia only gets you so far. When you actually need something to do the job, to get the job done, you're not going to go with nostalgia to get it done. You're going to go into what's current and get it done. You know what I'm saying? And you know, it's just it's one of those things that really kind of, I think, needed to be said about that. And I hope people understand it. I'm not trying to bash any other fans for what they think. You could certainly disagree with me all you want, but I'm just saying that from my perspective, and, you know, the things that I've seen in my experiences and stuff like that, this is the concept that I think fits better than to just suggest that, you know, we just keep using things, and, you know, and we you know, we never update. But we do. Humans do update all the time. You know, I mean, look, this is considered a watch now, and it does a lot more than tell you the fucking time. But I still wear an old Rolex. You know what I'm saying? No, it just, people would look at it and remember, oh, it was a great thing, you know, but it wouldn't. It just it's not the same. It's not the same as when everybody else has got something newer and things. You know, you just you want something that fits the time. You know. Okay, so that's it, and I hope everybody has a great week. So the next video I'll probably do will be back into politics again, maybe, but I'll talk to you guys later. Treat each other nice out there, and take care. Bye-bye.